Okay, hi. So, um, so, like I said last time, what I'd like to discuss today is what did David want? Okay, and but before we tackle before we get into the details, I want us to answer some of the kind of central questions in the story, starting with why didn't David? So again, so since we're looking at what David wanted, I want to first start with the kind of the obvious question of why didn't David kill Saul when he had two chances to do so?
At that point in his story, well, he had the affection of Saul's daughter and his son.
Well, but
He-
yeah, okay. So
So
out of consideration for Michal
we're not
and Jonathan.
we're not told explicitly how David felt, but both of them were. You'd think that there was an attachment there.
Right, but are we told that that's why he didn't kill David? That's why he didn't. What? That's why David didn't kill Saul.
No, it seems like he. So either he didn't want to, or he thought that God didn't want him to. That's kind of my two answers.
Well, look, when in the two times, let's see, two periods that we're talking about, David explains. He says, you know, I I mean I mean you no harm. Far be it from me to lay a finger on the anointed of God, etc., on the king of Israel. So, um, so David gives us the answer why he doesn't kill Saul. And in fact, when either Avishai or Yoav, his seconds in command, um, when whoever it is wants to do so, David stops him, and again saying, "We can't do, you can't kill God's anointed. Okay, you can't kill the king of Israel. That's a terrible thing to do." Okay, so David answers that question for us by saying either to Saul or to Avnil, the Saul's army chief, or to Avishai, um, I don't want to kill Saul. I'm not Saul's enemy. Okay, I don't want Saul's blood on my hands. I don't want to kill Saul. I'm not his enemy. I'm his humble servant. So I don't want Saul's life, and I don't want Saul's throne. Okay, so and we know this because David says so. Okay, David explains twice why I didn't kill him when I had the chance here, and why I didn't kill him when he had the chance there. Now, let's jump
But
to the. Oh, go ahead.
but in both of those conversations, like he's having a conversation with somebody else. It's not the narrative telling us, and it's not
Right.
David speaking to like a reliable interlocutor. He's talking to somebody that he may have of a political motive.
Right. Yeah. So, but you're right. The author doesn't tell us. So, yeah. But David explains himself. But you're right. David explains himself in public. Okay, so, and so I'd like to go back to this explanation in a bit. Okay. So this, you're right. It's a public explanation, which has to be taken in its public context. Okay. So let's jump to the end of this story, to chapter 31, 1 Samuel 31. This is verses 1 to 13. Okay, beginning of chapter 31. And okay, so David doesn't kill him. So how does Saul die? See, chapter 31, verse 1 through 13. That's the death of Saul.
You want me to read it?
No, just
Like starting in 4? So
just what So okay, so how did Saul die? Do you understand what happened to Saul? How Saul did find his death?
it was essentially some kind of suicide. He fell on the sword.
Right. Okay. So the narrator tells us, the Philistines were coming. Saul didn't want his body to be defiled by the Philistines, so he asks his sword bearer, his weapons bearer, to kill him. The guy says, "I can't do it. Far be it from me." So he kills himself. Okay, falls on his own sword. Okay, so that's chapter 31, verses 1 through 13. Now chapter 31 ends. That's the end of 1 Samuel. The very next chapter, there's another. So chapter 31 ends, and now starts chapter 1 in 2 Samuel. So how did Saul die here? This is verses 1 through 16.
It was in battle.
No, I mean both.
It finished me off. I'm in agony.
Right, and so how does he die?
So I finished him off, for I knew that he would never rise from where he was lying. Then I took the crown from his head and the armlet from his arm, and I brought it to them here to my Lord.
Okay, so how does Saul die? I mean, do these two accounts don't agree, right? How do you make sense of these? Well, what are the differences, or what is the difference?
One is that he did the final act in the first account. In the second account, somebody else did the final act.
Right. And by the way, who is this someone else?
It's
Remember, in the first account, in chapter 31, it's Saul and his weapons bearer. What do you call a weapons bearer? Is that the word?
Squire.
Squire. Let's go with squire. So it's Saul and his squire, and Saul asked the squire, "Please do it." The squire says no, and so Saul kills himself, falls on his sword. In the second account, it's similar in that he asks someone to do it, but who's the someone? Who's he asking?
It's a young man. I was an Amalekite.
Exactly. It's a young Amalekite, this Amalekite boy, or, lad. Okay. So some Amalekite boy happens to be there. You see in chapter 1, verse 4.
8?
Oh, sorry, 5. Sorry, 6. So David says, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan are dead? And the Amalekite boy says, I happened to be at the Gilboa, at the Mount Gilboa, where the Philistine battle took place. And here I see Saul trying to kill himself. He's leaning on his javelin, on his spear, not sword, but never mind. And he sees me, and he asks me to please do it. He asked me who I am. I'm some Amalekite kid. Please kill me so that whatever. Okay. So again, in both cases, Saul asks somebody else to kill him, but here it's his trusted squire. Here it's this Amalekite boy, and here the squire says, "No, I can't." And here the Amalekite boy does it for him. Okay, so.
But is there a difference too? Because he was apparently in agony, and in the second account there was this scene where he's in agony. In the first account doesn't seem to have that.
Right. Yeah. Clearly, in the first look, if um, if the first account were correct, he'd be dead. Okay, and if he weren't dead, there's the squire there to either help him out or do something. Here, according to the Amalekite boy, it's Saul alone. There's no squire, nothing, and Saul is alive. Okay. Not to mention the fact that in the first account, we're told that Saul died. You know, he didn't just wound himself. Okay, so how do we make sense of these? I mean, the death of a king of Israel, the first king of Israel, is pretty important. Okay, so what to make of this? How do you make sense of these two different stories?
The first account was being told by the narrator, it seems, and the second account was being told by the young Amalekite to
Right.
David. So they're different people reporting.
Right. And usually, on the face of it, well, not on the face of it. Okay, so if one account is told to us by the narrator and the other account is told to us by by some character, who do you trust? Like, which account is true?
I want to trust the narrator because he tells me a whole lot more stuff and a whole bunch of other stories
Right,
that I rely on.
Right, and
Versus
we all-
Amalekite boy,
exactly. First of all, we don't know him. Second, we don't know what his interests are. Not to mention that he's an Amalekite. Since when do we trust Amalekites? But what makes the... Okay, let's get back to this. We'll get back to this question later on about who's more believable here, the narrator or the Amalekites. So let's go back now to the story, back to the beginning of the David story, and back to this question of, in order to put things in order, what does David want? Okay, so at the beginning, this is chapter 17. Well, actually, but even before that, what do you think David wants? You know, David saunters into this Saul story with the music and the this and the that and Goliath and you know, becomes an officer in the army. What does David want? What's David doing with his life, or aims to do with his life?
see, he thinks the way he comes across in the beginning, especially with his brothers back and forth, is he wants to prove himself to his older brothers a little bit. He wants to prove himself. He's very courageous and wants to prove himself worthy. Like, no one takes him seriously, and he wants to prove everyone wrong.
Where do you get this? Is this
So he has that back and
Goliath
forth
story?
with his older brother. Yeah, the Goliath story, where he has that back and forth with his older brother, who says, "I know why you're here. Get out of here." And then he talks to Saul, and Saul doesn't even take him seriously.
Okay.
Everyone thinks he's foolish for doing this contest with Goliath as a young.
Right, but where do you get the inference that David wants to prove himself to his brothers or to...
That he insists on going up against Goliath anyways.
Right.
So I guess another alternative is that.
Well, look. So look, I'm not trying to kind of speculate on, you know, what could drive David. Again, he's a young boy. He's the youngest brother. He wants to prove himself to his. All might be true, but you know, our method here is to go by the, you know, what's called the pshat, the letter, the written word. Okay, so like if the book doesn't tell us, then we're in the dark. Okay, and we have to speculate. Okay, but the book does tell us. Okay, so if you read again, we're in chapter 17, the Goliath one, verses 17 to 27. Okay, so Jesse tells David, "Go take the stuff," and he goes there, and he sees what's going on at the camp, and he goes to his brothers, like you said. Okay, and then in 23, he's talking to his brother, and then somebody is telling him about what's going on with Goliath. Okay, and then what?
And there's the promise of a reward to anyone who kills Goliath. There'll be great riches and a daughter of the king in marriage.
Right. Well, okay, so the king will reward whoever kills Goliath. Like this person tells, David here, he goes to talk to his brothers, and he hears that the king will reward the conqueror of Goliath money, the daughter, the princess, and liberate his family, which by common understanding is liberate them from taxation. You see here in where is it? Verse 25. Okay, his family will become free in Israel. Okay, I'm assuming readers usually assume that means free from taxation. Okay, so financial reward, the king's daughter, and a tax break. And then what? Okay, so David just hears this in verse 25. And then in verse 26, David asks, to verify, is this indeed the deal? Is this indeed what will happen to the person that will remove this uncircumcised Philistine from the battlefield? Okay, this uncircumcised is, it's also uncircumcised, but it's kind of it's a synonym for dirty, basically. Okay, so David in verses 26, 27, David verifies: is this indeed the deal? Money, princess, and a tax break. And then in 32, after he verifies, in verse therefore he not in verse 32 in verse 32, David volunteers himself for the job. Okay, so we're not in the dark. The author, who again we trust the author. Okay? The author gives us the scene in which David hears what the reward will be, verifies what the reward will be, and then goes and volunteers himself. Okay? He wants the money. So obviously he wants the reward. He wants the money, he wants the princess, he wants the tax break for his family. Okay? Now, when you move forward, you'll see, or I don't know if you've noticed, but the author tells us 3 times the motivation David has for marrying Saul's daughter. Okay, if you look at, this is the next chapter now, chapter 18, verse 18. You see there? David says, "Who am I?" David said to Saul, "Who am I and who's my family, my little family, that I shall marry into the king?" Okay. And then, second time, in verse 22, 23. Okay, of the 22, sorry. Well, 22 and 23. It says twice. Again, about marrying into the king. That David's plan, or David will marry into the king, into the king's family, meaning. And then again, third time, in 26, 27. You see, and you see in 26 and 27. I don't know if you have. I
But
don't know if
isn't
I don't know if it's translated the same way about marrying into the king. Is that how it's?
so? I have when his courtiers told this to David, David was pleased with the idea of becoming the king's son-in-law before
Okay.
the time had expired.
Yeah. Okay. But so, in
David
any case,
went with his.
yeah, but so again, in Hebrew, it repeats. I guess it was the way to convey that, to marry into the king, but it's the same. Okay, meaning into the king's family and to become part of the royal family. Okay.
But isn't there a problem right here because Jonathan's still there?
What do you mean?
If he marries, I guess he would marry into the king's family, but he wouldn't necessarily become king,
Right.
just to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
close to the king.
Yeah. To become part of the royal family. Again, to become again the princess's husband, a prince by marriage. So 3 times the author tells us David's motivation for marrying Saul's daughter. Okay? And that is to marry into the king's family. Okay? The Bible also the author also tells us Saul's motivation for marrying his daughter to David, and also 3 times. Okay? And that is in same chapter, chapter 18. If you look at 17, verse 17.
So my translation said, Saul said to David, "Here's my older daughter, Merav. I will give her to you in marriage. In return, you will be my warrior and fight in my battles of the Lord."
Uh-huh.
Saul
And
thought, let not my hand strike him. Let the hand of the Philistine strike him." So he's
exactly.
trying to off him.
Yeah. He says, I don't want to kill him. Let the Philistines kill him for me. I want him to die. I want David to die. Okay, so I will give him Merav, the eldest daughter, and I'll make him an officer, and he'll fight my wars for me, and I'll be rid of him that way. The Philistines will kill him. And then again in verse 21, Saul said, and so by this point, Merav is no longer a candidate to he gives Merav to somebody else, but Michal, the second daughter, loves David. And Saul was told, this is in verse 20, and in 21 again Saul says, I'll give her to him, and she will be at his heels. How do you have it in English? 21.
I will give her to him, and she can serve as a snare for him,
Yeah, snare. Right.
so that the Philistines may kill him.
Right. Okay. And then again, so 21, 20. And then he tells his servants that, that this will be the case. And then a third time in verse 25. Okay, where again it says that, so Saul says, oh, I don't need a bride price. I don't need, because usually the groom has to pay the father for the bride, and David says, I don't have the money to pay for a princess's bride price. And Saul says, I don't need it. I don't need a bride price. All I need is 100 foreskins of Philistines, okay, in order to avenge the king's enemies. And Saul thought to have the Philistines kill David. Okay, so the price is so dangerous. Yeah, you have to fight 100 Philistines, kill 100 Philistines. And so again, so 3 times we're told that the reason why Saul is marrying his daughter to David is to have the Philistines kill David instead of Saul doing it himself. Okay, so we're told why David wants to marry the princess, why Saul wants the princess to marry David, and then we're told Michal's motivation, the princess's motivation, in verses 20 and 28. Why does Michal want this marriage?
So I have in 20, she had fallen in love with David.
Right, and then in 28, again, and Saul saw and knew that God was with David, and that Michal, the daughter of Saul, loved him. Okay, so Michal loves David. And by the way, this is the only time in the entire Bible in which a woman loves a man, in which the author tells us that a woman loves a man. Okay, so this is, you've just read a very special bit of biblical literature. And maybe it's a sign of true love too. So what we can see, what the author tells us, is that David sees this marriage as a political tool, and Saul sees this marriage as a political tool. Okay? And Michal loves David. Okay? And as we continue reading the story, next week, as we finish the David story, I'd like you to keep an eye on this relationship, and consider how you think. So we know that Michal loved him, okay? And as we continue reading, just keep an eye on this relationship and try to formulate an opinion on what David felt towards her. Okay. Okay, so we're talking about what David wanted. Okay, and so we know that David wanted to marry into the royal family, okay, advancing politically. But why would David? Where would David even get this idea of marrying a princess and moving up the ranks in the nation of Israel's royal family? He's a nobody. Okay, he's the youngest son from some no-name family. Okay, why would he even set this goal for himself, to advance himself into the royal family?
His father. And then when he gets to his father sends him to Saul, and then when he gets there, that whole scene that we just talked about a little while ago happens.
Right, but he sends him to Jesse, the father, sends him to inquire on his brothers. Right? See in chapter 17, verse 17, Jesse told David his son, "Take this bread to these breads to your brother." Well, that's it. Yeah. Oh, take these breads and the milk. So go give this bread to your brothers. Give these cheese things, I guess, to their commander, and say hi to your brother and see how they're doing. Okay. That's all Jesse tells him. Basically, go to your brothers. No talk about the king, no talk about marriage, no talk about any political ambitions.
So I would guess that they came from his father, and his brothers knew that David had those ambitions for all this. Just because the way his older brother says, "I know why you're here."
Okay, so why? You're right. The brother knows why David is here, and I'm trying to find out, what does David's brother know? What should we know? Like, why would David get this idea of trying to get to advance politically on the highest political stage? And again, this thing falls into his lap where the king offers his princess in marriage, to whoever kills Goliath. Okay, but even beforehand, like, where does David get the idea that this is a path for him? Look, I asked you about David's motivation in chapter 17, in the Goliath chapter. Okay? But we already know stuff about David before Goliath. The Goliath scene is David's third scene already. Okay, we met David in chapter 16. Okay, so what do we know about David from chapter 16? What does David know, and what does his brother know, etc. From chapter 16? Especially if you look at verse 12 and 13.
He was anointed by Samuel.
Exactly. Okay? So David was anointed to be the next king of Israel. There's a king, there's a ruling king. And here the great prophet Samuel comes to the family and anoints David in a secret ceremony as the next king of Israel. Okay? David knows that he's going to be king. I'm assuming his brother also knows, and his father. Okay? And then, so the first scene we find, our first meeting with David is the scene in which David is anointed as the next king of Israel. Okay? He knows he's got a great future ahead of him. Samuel says so. Samuel, obviously, is a pretty credible character. And then, somehow, David, of all the fiddle players in Israel, David gets chosen to play music for Saul in chapter 16, verse 18. Okay? And only then, in chapter 17, David's third appearance in the story, is David making his way to the battlefield to fight Goliath. Okay, so we understand why David wants to be there, okay, and why David jumps on this promise of marrying the princess and getting the financial reward for fighting Goliath. Okay, so it is completely understandable why David has this ambition to marry into the king's family. David knows that he is going to be king, and it's up to him to make it happen somehow. Hopefully, legitimately. I mean, he hopes his rise to monarchy will be legitimate. Okay, of course, it will be at the expense of Jonathan, but he doesn't know Jonathan yet, I guess. So he wins the king's favor with the music first, and then with the sword in the fight against Goliath. He then wins the princess's heart, Michal's heart. He then wins the prince's heart, Jonathan's heart. Okay? So basically, David is making his way in the world. Okay? He's doing what he can. He knows he needs to get to that top spot, and he is, again, befriending the king, doing well on the battlefield, impressing the generals, winning the princess's heart, winning the prince's heart. The only one who doesn't play along is Saul. Okay, Saul.
But in this,
Go ahead.
In this reading, it sounds like Jonathan and Michal are tools or a means to an end. And I don't. Is that fair? I don't know.
Let's talk about it later. Okay, if that's a fair reading. And I'm look, yeah, let's talk about it later when we talk about how things work out for David. If David is using people, or if things just fall into David's lap. It is a real question. We're not told. All we see is a pattern. Okay. Well, I'm not sure that we're not told. Okay, but let's get back to this later. So Saul will not clear the way for David. Okay, Saul clearly suspects what David is up to, and he tries to fight David's plan. which is also Samuel's plan and also God's plan. Okay? And so now because Saul, naturally being the king, doesn't want to just vacate his throne and give it to the more popular and handsome and successful General David, given the fact that Saul suspects David and is now hostile to David, this means that the only way David's plan could be realized now is with the removal of Saul and Saul's descendants. Okay? So, because David's just married to a princess. For David to get the throne legitimately, all of Saul's sons have to be dead, right? Which, just kind of to remove all doubt. By the end of Samuel, the book of Samuel, all of Saul's sons will be dead. So again, is it a plan? Do things just fall into David's lap? We'll see. We'll see if we're told. So to understand David's actions and his motives, and is he doing this again? Is he using these people, the princess, the prince, etc., as tools? We really do need to understand what kind of person David is. Okay, so I want to go back even further for a second to Saul's coronation in chapter 10, all the way back to chapter 10. If you read chapter 10, verses 22, 23. Okay, so this is after the coronation. 23. Where is it? Oh, sorry, yeah. It's so 27, not 23. So, actually, okay, 22, 23 as well. Okay, do you remember we talked last week about the hiding amongst the equipment? Okay, so here Samuel comes to coronate Saul, and nobody can find Saul. Okay, so they're asking, where is this kid? Where is this kid? Ah, there he is. God says. God tells Samuel, there he is, I see him, he's hiding amongst the equipment. Okay? And then jump to 27. Okay, so he's coronated, the whole, the people, so, long live the king, and the king, and Samuel tells the people again about, warning them about what's going to happen with kings and everything else. And then everyone goes home, in verse 27, and Saul goes home. And then what happens in 27?
So my translation has it, but some scoundrels said, how can this fellow save us? So they scorned him and brought him no gift, but he pretended not to mind.
Right. Okay, so why is it there? Both of these little snippets. Saul hiding among hiding in the equipment when he's about to be coronated, and Saul being levazot, dissed, and the king, these scoundrels are, what's the proper word for diss? To diss someone, disrespect him. Okay, whatever. So they disrespect him in public, and he pretends not to hear, and doesn't respond. Okay, what are these snippets there for? I mean, what do they do to you as a reader?
They make Saul seem like he's in a precarious situation, like he's weak.
Right.
He doesn't think of himself as king.
You're right. Okay, so it's the author. Look, you're just reading the story about Saul. And what the author is doing is he's building Saul's character in your mind without saying, the author isn't telling you Saul is a very impressive looking guy, but in fact he is shy and weak, and he's got insecurity, and he feels out of out of his element in this position as king. This is not his natural position. He doesn't feel comfortable embodying this role of king. Okay, he could have just told you what Saul's character is like, but instead he gives you these snippets so that you will create for yourself this characterization of Saul. Okay, and that is that Saul is a big guy and a good guy with a good and trusting soul, as we saw on his journey to Samuel and back from Samuel. When he met Samuel for the first time, and he was looking for the donkeys, met Samuel, Samuel anointed him, and then he goes back home. Okay, so we know Saul is a big guy and a good guy with a good heart, but we can see now, thanks to these little snippets that the author inserts here, we understand his character, another aspect of his character. He's shy, he lacks confidence, he's unaccustomed to wielding power. Okay, that's why he doesn't punish these scoundrels. Okay, he doesn't behave like a king. Okay, and it's understandable because he's done nothing before becoming king. Okay, he was a farm boy who went out looking for his father's donkeys, and bang, he becomes king. Okay, so that's kind of the character building that we get for Saul. How about David? What by the time by the time we get this kind of enmity, this confrontation with Saul, chapter 18 and further, what impression did you internalize? Did you absorb of David? Like, if the impression that we have of Saul's character is what the author led us to think, okay, what we think of Saul is what the author wanted us to think of Saul. That's why he told us about the hiding in the whatever. That's why he told us the story of meeting Samuel the way he did, and the story about these scoundrels. How about David? What impression have you developed of David thanks to the author's characterization?
He seems to have no reticence about his capabilities.
Right.
He's courageous, I suppose.
Right. So look,
He doesn't balk at anything.
Yeah. So he never balks. You're right. He's very kind of an A-type personality. But we're told that we know that he's a man of with a strong military resume, even before Goliath. Okay, so before Saul became king, he was nothing. Okay, he was just a farm boy whose father sent him to look for the donkeys. But David, even before Goliath, is introduced to us. He's introduced to Saul as a man who's good with good with a harp or good with a fiddle, I guess, and a wise and brave soldier. This is in chapter 16, verse 18. Verse 18. Yeah. Okay, I know Jesse's son knows how to play, and a heroic soldier and a wise man of war. Okay, so that's our first. So already David has more of a kind of a kingly or more of a CV befitting a king, befitting a leader. Okay, he's a brave and wise soldier, and then he gains even more military experience versus Goliath, and then immediately as a popular and strong commander, one of the leading officers in Saul's army, a very successful officer in Saul's army. Okay. He then becomes. Go ahead.
But doesn't that contradict the fact that when he goes with Goliath to Goliath to the war zone, repeatedly he's told, you're young, go back home. You're young, go back home, which makes sense with the courage and the type A personality because he's young. You're just a shepherd, go back home.
No, but wait.
His
Look,
brothers tell him that in the field,
yeah,
in the war zone.
yeah. The brother says, where is it? In chapter 17. Da-da-da-da. He's talking. Where's that chapter? Where's the verse where his brother tells him to go home? 28. Okay, so Eliav, the brother, tells him, "Why'd you come here and leave the sheep in the desert? I know what your plan is, because you came here to see the war." Okay, and that's it, right? I mean,
But
is there
that,
anything else?
I think before that, but I have to look it up. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, I think so. It's like chapter 17 starts with. Okay, so in earlier it says the three older brothers. This is in chapter 17, verse 13. The three older brothers went after Saul to war, and the three went to war. Were these three names them, and David was the small one, and David went and came back.
Exactly.
He went with them, but came back to
Because he was
shepherd.
too young.
Well, no, it says to shepherd the sheep, shepherd the
Yeah, but
flock.
obviously, if he was of age, he would have gone to
Yeah,
war.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
No,
not
yeah,
a,
yeah.
not a choice.
Well, I'm not sure. Look, because we already know that he's a man of war. Okay, so maybe
That's exactly my question. It doesn't make sense because on the one hand, they tell us that he's young and he's going and he's not, I mean, he goes with his brothers, but he's sent back. And then when he does go to bring them cheese and whatever, his brother tells him, go back home. Who's
yeah.
watching the sheep?
So look,
If
he's
he's
not.
such a man of war, his brother wouldn't say, go back home.
Well,
Who's
no. So
watching the
look,
sheep?
we're told that he went in verse 15. David went and came back went to Saul, went to the battlefield, I guess with his brothers, and came back to shepherd the herd, and then he came back a second time. But look, we're not told that there was a general conscription where every man of fighting age was sufficient to come. In fact, look, David had other brothers who didn't go to the war. Okay, so maybe the family can only spare so many people from the farm, and so they send the three eldest brothers, and the others have to stay. So it doesn't mean that
Because I read his personality as fitting of a teenager. It seemed like a teenager-y kind of
oh no
attitude.
yeah
That
actually,
he's, confident, he knows more than anyone. He can beat, this giant that everyone else who has a bit of sense, shies away from, and
right.
he's like, I can beat him. It's very teenager-y sort
Yeah,
of
no, it
thinking.
very well might be. Okay, so all we know is that, look, he might be again, teenagers back in the day were more adults than teenagers in our day. His confidence might be a feature of his youthfulness. Okay, but we know because we're told that David already had a military reputation before Goliath. Okay, when Saul was looking for when somebody recommended to Saul a fiddler, we're told this man has been successful on the battlefield. Okay, which might also explain his confidence. I've already been successful on the battlefield. I want to go to this battlefield. Maybe he resents the fact that only the three eldest brothers are permitted by his father to go, but somebody needs to stay and work the farm. Okay, and again, David isn't the only brother who's forced to stay. Okay, so you very well might be correct that he has this youthful self-confidence because he doesn't have sense enough to have fear. like some older people. In any case, so he starts off with a military resume, develops more of a military, again, halo by killing Goliath, then becomes a very popular and very successful commander officer in Saul's army. And then when he's on the run from Saul, he becomes this leader of an outlaw gang of 400 men in the desert. Now we're already in chapter 22. Okay? And now, speaking of this outlaw gang, when he's on the run, when you read the story about Nabal and Abigail, this is in chapter 25. What's your impression? Like, how does David's group of 400 men, how do they keep themselves alive? Like, what do they? How do they feed themselves? Okay, so they're.
From what I remember, they rely on well, they guard, sheep and then I guess possessions, whatever cattle and whatever you have, and then they get paid and they get
Right. If you can see this from what the
kind of like paid help.
well, look, what
But what it sounds like what happened there, it sounds like protection, like a
Exactly.
mafia protection.
Exactly, it's a protection racket. Okay, and I want to see when David. Okay, so this is chapter 25. Okay, and David. Okay, so we're told chapter 25 starts with introducing this very rich man, Nabal, and he's got 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And here is the period where you, how do you say when you clip the sheep? Whatever the word is. Okay, so this is the period, kind of like it's like the harvesting of the sheep. Again, I can't think of the word in English. Hagiz.
Sheep shearing?
Sheep
shearing?
shearing. Great, yeah. Okay, it's a shearing. So, okay, so all the people come and shear the sheep, and this is where you get it to market. So it's a big kind of, again, just like the harvest. It's high intensity work, and this is where the money is going to be made. And David hears that this is happening, that Nabal is shearing his sheep, and he says 10 men to go and say hi to Nabal for me. And I hear, and we hear, they tell Nabal a message from David. I hear that you're shearing your sheep, and here we guarded them in the Carmel, in the mountains, and please give to these boys, to these 10 messengers I sent, whatever you see fit. Okay, and so they go to Nabal, and Nabal says, "Who the heck are you? Who is Ben Ishai? Who's David?" And I don't know who this is. I don't owe you anything. Okay, so clearly they're not employees. Okay, they are, again, just like these. You park your car on the street, and these hoods say, "Hey, do you want us to guard your car for you?" Okay, so of course, if you want them to not harm your car or steal your car, you pay them a few bucks. And you see this again in the workers tell Abigail. I'm trying to find it here. Here, verse 14. Okay, so the messengers go back to David, and David, well, we'll get to that in a second. But the workers tell Abigail, or one of them tells Abigail, that what just happened, that David sent messengers, and what happened with Nabal. And he says, these people, David's people, were good to us. They didn't steal from, when we were shepherding the sheep, they didn't steal from us, and everything was fine. And they protected us when we were out in the meadows. Okay, do you see this in 15, 16? No, 15 and 16. Do you see? Yeah, in the translation? Okay, good. So
That's why it sounds to me like he sometimes is hired to do this, because they said that they did protect them. It's not like they came out of nowhere and said.
Well, it sounds like the difference between somebody that you hire to protect you and a protection racket.
You know who they are.
Right. No, that you initiate when you hire a bodyguard or somebody to guard your car. You hire the person, and then he guards your car. Okay, the initiative comes from you. With a protection racket, the protector offers himself. Okay, so here you are on the street, and then the racketeer comes and says, "Hey, I'll protect your car for you." For you. Okay, so it sounds like the same thing, same deal here, where they were out in the sheep, and here are these rough men, but they're not harming us. They're around us, protecting us, like this kid tells Abigail. Okay, and then after they come and ask, hey, I protected you all these days. Give to me whatever you think is fit. Okay. So that's just kind of, so we see David going really from strength to strength, and like David said, this David here on Zoom, he's confident. He never shies away. He's in before Goliath, during Goliath, in Saul's campaign after Goliath, and then even when he's on the run in the desert with these 400 men. The image that we get from David, about David, the image that we form in our heads by reading all these stories about David, is of a confident man. Just like for Saul, again, the author didn't tell us in words, he just showed us snippets from Saul's life, and we formed the impression on our own that Saul has these characteristics. With David, again, we just read stories about David, but the image that we develop in our own minds is that David is confidence personified. Okay? He's a little guy who confronts a giant. He's a nobody who marries the king's daughter. He's a born leader. Okay? The people were told repeatedly, the people love him. The people are devoted to him. The people in the kingdom in Saul's kingdom, they praise him, they love him, they celebrate him, and his people here too. They follow him. Okay. So if you read this story and keep track of the word love, or if you copy and paste the story from the internet, the David story, and do a Control F of the word love, like search the word love in the story, you'll see it coming up repeatedly about how everyone loves David. Okay? Jonathan loves David. Michal loves David. The people, numerous times we're told, love David. God loves David. Hiram, the king of Tyre, Phoenician king of Tyre, Canaanite king of Tyre, loves David. Saul loves David. Okay, and when he's brought in as a fiddler. Okay, we're told Saul loves David. Okay, so repeatedly, David is confident, David is strong, David is beloved by everyone. Okay, and incidentally, not once, ever, in David's life, never does the text tell us that David loves any character in the story. Okay? David receives love.
Oh, with Jonathan, they said that they were הנאהבים, דוד ויונתן, הנאהבים והנעימים. I don't remember the exact quote, but
but there was a like it. I don't know.
David's it's the קינה של דוד when Jonathan dies in war.
No. When
the קינת דוד.
Yeah, but no. But when he eulogizes Jonathan, he tells he says, this is in 2 Samuel already. Just a second. Chapter 1. 20. No. Oh yeah, chapter. Yeah, 26. Yeah. 25. How heroes have fallen in war. And Jonathan falling on blah, blah, blah. I mourn for you, my brother Jonathan. You were very pleasant to me. Your company pleased me. Your love for me surpassed the love of women. Okay? Your love for me surpassed the love.
Yeah, but it says David ויונתן הנאהבים, like as them as a couple.
Where is
which
it?
means that.
Where is this?
I only remember it by heart.
I think, yeah. Actually,
something like that.
Do me a favor, Google it now. See where it's from. I don't think it's from Samuel. It might be from some other part of the Bible. It might be from the song, the Song of Saul.
קינת דוד שמואל ב' פרק א', just a second.
No, not Quinnat David. No, what you just said. Aneavim. I know about Quinnat David. Yeah. See, the eulogy, David's eulogy of Jonathan comes here. Yeah, but it doesn't say. I know that poetry that you just cited, but it doesn't come here.
ספר שמואל ב' פרק א' מתחילה כהערת המספר המקראי, פסוקים י"ז-י"ח, וכוללת 9 פסוקים. המבנה של הקינת דוד אינו אופייני לקינה, אלא שירת ניצחון.
No, don't. I'm not asking. Like I know Quinnat David, the eulogy, David's eulogy of Jonathan. I'm asking about that phrase you mentioned. הנאהבים בחייהם ובמותם לא נפרדו. Google that. Yeah, because I'm reading.
So I don't know if this is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, it's when he flung himself face down on the ground and bowed low 3 times. They kissed each other and wept together, and David wept longer. And this is in chapter 20, verses 41.
Chapter 20, verse which?
41.
20.
Okay, I was mistaken.
Wait, just a second. Wait. I don't have a verse 41 in chapter 20.
1 Samuel 20.
Oh, 1 Samuel. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. 1 Samuel 20.
This is
verse 41. Yeah. So look, I was just talking about they clearly had a friendship. Okay, and they kissed each other and they hugged and everything else. But we're never told ever that David loved anyone. And we're told repeatedly that David was loved by many people. So what were you saying, Tom?
I was mistaken. It says Saul and Jonathan, lovers in and pleasant in
Okay.
life and death.
Okay.
It's not
Oh,
David. So
is that from the burial when David buries them at the end of
it,
the, which chapter?
it's the same. The Kinat David. It's in the Kinat David. It's Pasuk Kaf Gimel. Shaul v'Yonatan Anaavim v'Animim.
Wait. I need to find that back. So we're now back in 2 Samuel chapter
Kaf
2,
Gimel.
23. Oh yeah, okay, great. Saul and Jonathan.
Saul and Jonathan. It's not
Saul-
David. I
yeah.
remembered it wrong.
Yeah, Saul and Jonathan, the beloved and the pleasant in their life and in their death, did not part from eagles. Okay, good. So my point is just that it's just kind of an interesting observation about David, that he receives love from everyone. Okay, from God, from Saul, from foreign kings, from the people, from the princess and prince. But we're never told that he loves. The verb love never appears with David as an active. It's always as a receiving. And it's especially surprising in the eulogy of Jonathan, because you'd expect the eulogizer to say, "I loved the deceased." It's rare. Well, I'm not an expert, but you'd expect the eulogizer to express love for the deceased rather than tell the audience, "The deceased really loved me. Yeah, he was great to me." And look, what is evident in the relationship was Jonathan's love for David. Okay, and again, Jonathan gives David his armor and his sword. Jonathan supports David's claim to the monarchy. Jonathan gives up his own claim to the monarchy for David. Okay, that throughout the book, throughout the story, Jonathan gives stuff to David. We never hear what David gives to Jonathan, other than, again, friendship, but real things. The same is true in David's relationship with Jonathan's sister, with the princess Michal. Okay, again, what's evident is her love for him. She sacrifices for him, not the other way around. She helps him escape against his. She turns on her father. So look, the point of all of this is that, again, we just get the impression. The author doesn't tell us, hey, this David is a born leader. Okay, this David is an alpha male. This David is just this inspirational, kind of like the high school quarterback. Okay, he doesn't tell us. He shows us, and we just get the image. We get the impression without even we build a certain character of David in our heads because we're exposed to all these things. For example, with the love stuff. Okay, like there's this. Everybody loves David, and you also love David, because you get this impression. Okay, so we're shown that David is a born leader. His followers are devoted to him. He's confident. He's a tough guy, like als, as they say in Arabic. And look, when David's honor is attacked, when Naval says, "Who the heck is David? I don't know. I don't know David. I don't owe David anything. To heck with David." He behaves very differently than we saw Saul behaving. When Saul was disrespected, he stayed silent and pretended he didn't hear. When David is disrespected, as soon as he, chapter, this is 1 Samuel 25. Okay, so verse 11, 12, 13. Nabal tells what he tells the David's 10 messengers, and they hear. They don't say a word. Verse 12. They turned around and went back and told David all these things, and immediately, the next thing David says. So they told David all these things, and then verse 13. And David told his men, "Put on your swords," and he put on his sword. And then, with 420 men, they got on their horses or wherever, took their equipment, and started walking towards Navan. Okay, so that, if you want to contrast that with Saul, it's a perfect reflection of the different characters. Saul is not Saul forgives his honor because he doesn't have this kind of confidence, this alpha male characteristic that David has. David, as soon as he's dissed, that's it. Sword on, everybody, swords on, we're going. Nobody talks to me that way. And look, from that conversation between Naval's workers and Abigail, look take a look at verse 17. Yeah. Okay. So in 15 and 16, they tell Abigail that David's men were good to them. They didn't harm any of the sheep and everything else. But in 17, they tell Abigail, this is serious. They know that David's men are rough and coming for blood. Okay. So they're warning her. That we need to prepare because Naval has angered a group of men that should not be angered. Okay? And we know that they're speaking the truth when they warn her, because we read in verse 21 and 22 that David is saying, "I am going because Naval mistreated me. I protected his sheep, and now he's rewarding my good service with ingratitude." Remember, David, last week I told you, so will God do to me, and so much more. So you see, is that how it's translated for you? Verse 22. This is David saying.
So it says, "May God do thus and more."
Yeah.
To the enemies of David, if by the light of morning I leave a single male of his.
Yeah. Okay. So he says, "May God do to this and more to David's enemy if I will kill everything." Okay. So we've already we developed this suspicion that David is in the protection racket. And then Abigail's workers are warning her, these men are coming for blood. And then David himself is saying, "I'm coming for blood. Okay, I'm coming to kill you all." And sure enough, so Abigail, of course, appeases him, and he turns back, but Naval dies. Okay, so how does Naval die? Okay, so Abigail comes to him, says, "Oh, please, da, da," and she gives him all these gifts and everything else, and you shouldn't kill your enemies by your own hands, and da, 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 because it's you're destined to be king of Israel, and it would look terrible if you killed your enemies with your own hands. And so he says, "You're right, you're a wise woman," and he turns back. And then Naval dies, but how?
The Lord struck Naval.
Where is it? Just a second. Which verse is it?
38.
Okay, yeah, so David goes back, and Abigail, 36, Abigail goes to Nabal and has this kind of a party with alcohol, etc., etc. And 37, wait a second. Where does it says God does this?
So in my translation, it says about 10 days later, the Lord struck Naval and he died.
Oh yeah.
In
Yeah,
30.
yeah. Sorry, yeah. But beforehand in 37, okay, in the morning, when the wine, when Naval got out of his drunken stupor, Abigail told him what happened with David the day before, that she turned David around, and his heart died within him, his heart stopped within him, and he became like stone. Right? And 10 days later, God took his soul and he died. Okay? So David came to kill Nabal and kill everything in sight. He gets turned around, gets sweet-talked by Abigail to not do it, but Nabal dies, and how did Nabal die? He just dropped dead. And by the way, his widow became David's wife. Okay, so now is this just a happy coincidence, like a fluke, or is there a hint that this was not just random? I mean, was there a hint that this would happen, that Nabal would die? Look. Wait, before you answer, look, it is a remarkably happy coincidence.
Right.
Okay, that David comes to kill him. This guy disses David in public, humiliates him, and then the next day he has some sort of stroke and soon dies. And David takes his wife. Okay, so it could be a happy coincidence. Maybe just God did it, kind of struck his heart and made him, his heart turned to stone. But is there a hint that maybe this is not just a random heart attack?
It would make sense that, well, she came out of the home as he was having a feast, and he was merry and very drunk. She did not tell him anything at all until daybreak. It could be that she had poisoned him.
Well, no, look. Everything could be. I'm again. Our method is to go by the text. Okay, so look, when you just read his death scene, maybe she poisoned.
So my translation has.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have his heart died. It has his courage died within him, and he became like a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died.
Yes.
So 10 day.
Yeah. So in Hebrew, it's his heart died within him, and he became stone. Okay. So some sort of paralysis hit him. Okay. So he had some sort of medical event. And he became like stone, but obviously he's still alive for 10 days. But he had some sort of paralysis. Okay, so maybe she poisoned him, maybe it was just a stroke. The text does not say, so we can't. I mean, we can speculate, but it is just a speculation. It could be a happy coincidence. But take a look at Abigail's conversation with David in verses 26 to 31.
So I swear, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as you live, the Lord who has kept you from seeking redress by blood with your own hands, let your enemies and all who harm my Lord fare like Nabal.
Right.
Here is the present.
Okay, so she says, may all the enemies of my Lord, of David, may all your enemies. So she says in 26, okay, thank goodness you don't have your enemy's blood on your hands. because God protects you and avenges you against your enemies. Okay, and then and she says, where is it? Yeah. May all your enemies, may all your enemies and those who seek to harm you be like Naval, end up like Naval. Already. Okay? May all your enemies, we can't imagine that she's saying, may all your enemies be rich and prosperous. She's saying, Naval will be out of the picture. May all your enemies suffer the fate of Naval. Okay? And then she asks him to turn back, because it would be a 31, verse 31. Okay, she asked him to turn back because it would be a public relations stumbling block for you in your mission to be the king of Israel if you shed your enemy's blood by your own hands. Okay, where is it with your own hands?
Have shed blood needlessly, and that my Lord sought redress with his own hands.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. If my Lord meaning you, okay? She's talking about you. It's like the way a subordinate speaks to a superior. Okay? It will be a stumbling block for you if you, as you progress, as you aim to become king of Israel, needlessly shed your enemy's blood by your own hands. Okay, so she's promising death to his enemy. Okay, so she's saying, may all your enemies be like Naval. Naval will be out of the picture. Okay, she's saying Naval is as good as dead, but don't you do it. Naval is as good as dead, but without blood, without his blood on your hands. And then she ends this speech to David in 31 by saying, and please remember me, your humble servant. Okay, so please turn away. Don't do this with your own hands. May all your enemies be just like Naval. And you won't have this PR stumbling block by killing somebody with your own hands. And please remember me, your humble servant. Okay, so she's offering Naval's head, and her price is some reward. Please remember me. Okay, and what the reward is, we find out immediately after Naval dies. In the very next verse. Okay, 10 days later, this is 38, 39. 10 days later, God took him and he died. Naval died, and David heard that Naval died, and he said, "Thank God that avenged me from Naval, and kind of prevented me or didn't require me to do it myself." And then he sent men to speak to Abigail about taking her for a wife. Okay, so it sounds like a transaction. Okay, so again, it could be that it was just a random stroke that took Naval, or maybe that God did it. Okay, we don't know. But we hear Abigail promise David, or indicate, lead David to believe that Naval will be out of the picture. And when he is, please remember your humble servant. Okay, I'll do this for you. Don't you bloody your own hands. Okay, so again, it's not clear cut, but we can't be surprised that Naval is dead when just a few verses earlier, Abigail said, "Don't worry, this problem will be taken care of for you, and you don't have to do it yourself." Okay. Now, this story, if you think of it, next week we'll read the story of David and Bathsheba. And I hope you can see how similar this story is to that one. In fact, if you read it in the Hebrew, even the language is similar. Some phrases repeat from the story of Abigail and Nabal and the story of Bathsheba and Uriah. And in fact, the similarity of the situation might even explain where David will get the idea to solve his Bathsheba problem the way he did. Okay, you have the husband killed, and you take the wife. Okay, problem solved, mission accomplished. Now, I bring this up here at the beginning of the David story, but I'm sure you noticed as you read through that David's enemies just keep dying or being killed. Just as Abigail says here, God keeps David safe. God avenges him against his political enemies. David never kills any of his political rivals. And he never orders others to kill them. And yet, all of them are killed. And in fact, when David finds out that this enemy or that enemy was killed, he's either angered by it or heartbroken by it. Okay, so much so that he cries out and wails over it. And always in public. Okay, like when Avner dies, when Yoav kills Avner, when Yoav kills Amasa, when Saul's 7 children die, sons are killed, when Saul dies, of course. You always have this public eulogy. When Absalom dies, is killed. Okay, so all these political enemies are killed, never by David's hand, and never by David's order. And David is always publicly wailing or angered about the fact that somebody killed my political enemy for me. Okay, because David, as David told us at the beginning, well, why doesn't he kill Saul? I don't want his blood on my hands. I don't want. David is a good man. David doesn't want bloodshed. And yet his enemies keep dying. And again, he's crying about it. He's chastising Yoav. How could you kill this man? How could you kill this man? Because the message that we're getting is that David is a good man who doesn't want bloodshed, and it just happens all around him. And to me it reminds me always when I read the David story of Mark Antony's speech in Julius Caesar. Are you familiar with the Brutus is an honorable man speech? Okay.
Yep.
So I'll send you after my favorite. Well, I love Charlton Heston, so I'll send you after the speech in the Charlton Heston movie. But the beauty of that eulogy of Antony's eulogy of Caesar is that we, the audience in the theater, and the crowds in Rome are told that these assassins, who were former friends of Caesar, Brutus among them, they feared that Caesar was becoming a tyrant, and therefore they killed him really to save the Republic. Okay, the audience in Rome is told that, and we in our seats are told that they did it to save the Republic. And then, at the moment of their victory, they allow Mark Antony, Caesar's ally, to give a speech, to give a eulogy, to demonstrate to the people and to us in the crowd, in their seats, that they're not tyrants, that they really did try to save the Republic. And then Antony because he knows that it's a very dangerous thing to be pro-Caesar at that point. So he's careful during the eulogy about how he criticizes the assassin. He doesn't look. He's delivering the eulogy with a watchful eye of the assassins, of Brutus and the others, Cassius, etc. Okay, and so he doesn't criticize them directly. He in fact praises them. But in a circuitous way, he mobilizes the people of Rome and mobilizes us in the seats to turn against the assassins. Okay, and I just want to read the relevant passage from the speech. Okay, so friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is often interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus has told you that Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously has Caesar answered it. So here, not so. Here, under the leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men. Here come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. Caesar has brought many captives to Rome, whose ransoms filled the general coffers. When the poor cried, Caesar wept. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I offered Caesar, I thrice offered him a kingly crown, which he thrice refused. Is that ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he's an honorable man. And it goes on. Okay, so it's a great scene. But so the point is that this line, Brutus is an honorable man, has become this kind of a rhetorical dagger that people use, assuming that we all know the play, that we all know the reference, which I guess is becoming an increasingly false assumption. But my senses, or my impression. Okay, I'll repeat. When I read the book of Samuel, the author repeatedly tells us that David is an honorable man. David is a good man who abhors bloodshed, yet his enemies keep dying through no fault of his own. Okay? So after Saul's death, David goes to war against. Now, first of all, Saul dies not at David's hands, and he's outraged by it, or saddened by it, heartbroken by it. Okay, but after Saul's death, there's a big war. David goes to war against the house of Saul, against Saul's son Ishbosheth, and Saul's commander-in-chief of Nil. And after his victory, David offers of Nil a job. He forgive and forget. But Yoav ben Tzeruiah, David's army chief, kills of Nil. And David is heartbroken. He wails about the noble of Nil and chastises Yoav publicly for killing him. You can see it in 2 Samuel chapter 3 at the end, verses 27 to 39. It's a big deal. How could you have killed Avnil, the army chief of my enemy? Okay. And you'll see there, if you read again, chapter 3, verses 27 to 39, the author tells us the people are convinced, the audience is convinced that David's hands and heart were clean. Okay? David did not want Avnil dead. He's not at fault. It was Yoav's fault. Yoav did it. Okay, so the author tells us the people believed that David was faultless. And my impression is that biblical commentators through the ages also agreed that David is faultless. David is an honorable man. Then immediately after Avnil's death, Ishbosheth, his boss, Saul's son, the reigning king of Israel, at least of the northern tribes, is having a nap. So this is in 2 Samuel chapter 4. Ishbosheth is having a nap, and two men burst into his house and kill him and cut off his head. And then they travel with the severed head all night to Judea, to bring the severed head to David. And repeating his performance with the Amalekite boy, the Amalekite boy who delivered the news of Saul's death. David, again, is outraged that you would kill a king in Israel. And he kills the Amalekite boy. Okay, and here he repeats that performance to the T. Okay, he kills these two men immediately. For how dare you kill a king in Israel? My enemy, by the way. Okay, he's outraged that these people would kill a king. Okay, so again, David is an honorable man. David's hands are clean. He did not want this assassination. It's just that all these other people just keep killing his enemies for him. Later on, if you jump to 2 Samuel chapter 21, this is towards the end already. Okay, so chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. Okay, there's more enemies are killed. Seven of Saul's the seven remaining sons of Saul. 7 remaining sons of Saul are killed by the Gibeonites. Okay, so there's a terrible drought in Israel. David asks God why this is happening. God tells him that it's Saul's fault for killing these Gibeonites. And so David approaches the Gibeonites and asks, how can I make amend for Saul's crime against you? And the Gibeonites, are the ones who suggest that maybe what will make this right is if we kill Saul's 7 remaining sons. Okay, and then David, what can he do? He simply acquiesces. To save his people from starvation, to lift the drought, he rounds up Saul's 7 remaining sons and delivers them to the Gibeonites, who kill them. And once these 7 rivals and potential enemies are dead and in the ground, David digs them up, brings back their bones, plus the bones of Saul and Jonathan, and gives them a fancy and kingly state burial in Saul's ancestral grave in Benjamin. Because again, David is an honorable man. David didn't want this. David honors his enemies, his rivals. He doesn't want to kill them. He doesn't want them dead. Other people want them dead. Later on, with Absalom's rebellion, or not later on, beforehand, with Absalom's rebellion, the handsome and popular son leads a rebellion against David. And David gives explicit instructions not to kill the boy, not to kill Absalom. But again, Yoav insists on killing him. Again, David's hands are clean. Yet the work gets done. The rivals get cleared. And again, David goes out in public, as he did in the case of Saul, as he did in the case of Nel, and the case of Ishbosheth, and wails over the death of the popular and beloved Absalom. And again, as he did before, rails against Yoav, the evil minister. And again, just like with Avnil, here too, the people see that David didn't want Absalom dead. Because David, again, is an honorable man. Another episode is with Amasa. I don't know if you followed that one, but actually we didn't read that one yet. We'll read it for next week. So after Absalom's death, David forgives Shimei, which, this guy who from Saul's family who wronged him during the rebellion, and he forgives Amasa, who was Absalom's top general. Absalom's army chief was Amasa. And just like David did with Avnei, you remember, Avnei was Saul's army chief, and then Ishbosheth's army chief, who fought a war against David. When David defeats him, he offers him a job. Okay? Same thing here happens in Absalom's rebellion. David wins the war, and he offers Absalom's army chief the job of being his top general. Okay? So he takes them in. And Yoav argues, we need to kill them. We need to, or argues for vengeance, not forgiveness. Okay? And, the people see this, and they praise David for forgiving his enemies. They praise David as a uniter, not a divider. And so do biblical commentators through the ages. They commend David's magnanimity and his spirit of unity after these civil wars. Okay? But Amasa, just like Avnei, is killed by Yoav. Okay? David's hands, so this general who took up arms against David is killed, but not by David. David's hands are clean. And David eulogizes Amasa as he did Avnei, as he did Ishbosheth, as he did Saul. Okay? As he eulogized Saul's 7 murdered sons, and as he did Absalom. Okay? So all these people, all these political rivals are killed for David, but never by David. Honorable man. Okay? And again, the commentators for 2,000 years accept this image of David. Look, no commentator who reads the story of David has any doubt that David is capable of heinous acts of murder. Okay, we know full well, thanks to the story of Uriah the Hittite, that David was highly capable of murder. We also know it from the Naval story. He came to murder. He came to kill. Okay, but forget that. He didn't. Okay? With the Uriah story, we know he's a murderer. Or he's capable of it. Okay? Now, so David, in the Uriah story, David orders Yoav to kill Uriah in a way that would leave Yoav's fingerprints on the crime. Okay? Uriah is killed in battle, and David is far away when this happens. His hands are clean, and he marries the widow. Again, just like he married Naval's widow. So we have this image of a man who is capable of murder, whose political rivals keep being murdered. But we see David every time heartbroken by it and angered by it. Okay, with his tears for Saul and Saul's sons and Avnei and Amasa, etc., etc. Okay, so it brings up, it forces us to, again, when we try to understand who David is, or David's character, is David a sentimentalist? Okay, with again these tears and this kind of this heartbreak and anger for the death of his rivals, or is he a Machiavellian performer? Okay, is this just a public act in public? So basically, is David signaling to Yoav what to do? Okay. This needs doing, as we saw with the Uriah story. Okay. David isn't killing him. David is telling Yoav, this needs doing. And yet, in public, he acts like he's shocked and dismayed that his right-hand man would do such things. Okay. So again, there's this. It's a problem in the character of David. So, of these two counter images, that David is sincere and sentimental in his sorrow for this needless bloodshed and continuing the divisions in the nation. Is he sincere, or is he a Machiavel who is sending Yoav or sending messages to Yoav about what needs doing, and then in public putting on a face of a uniter, not a divider? What's your impression?
So I don't trust what David says in public, but I don't necessarily, like, it seems like the death of Jonathan may have affected him differently than the death of Saul, which may have been different than the death of Abner. I don't know if they're all the same, but the public presentation, which seems to be the same, I don't think is trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with I would take Jonathan out of the equation simply because Jonathan is not a rival. Jonathan has already abdicated the crown to David. Jonathan told David that you will be king and I will be your right-hand man. So I don't think he's one of this sequence. Okay.
Then yeah, it seems like Joab is his hatchet man.
Yeah. Yes, well, it's. Oh, sorry, you're going to say.
And especially in light of the Uriah story, if he's willing to do what he was planning to do, that we know he was planning to do through the narrators telling us this,
right,
to Uriah, then it's not surprising that he would be this Machiavellian type strategist.
Yeah. Look, at the very least, look, like I said, we know that David is not above it. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that he did it, but we know from the Uriah story that and the Naval story that David is not above such things. Okay. He's not like a yeshiva student who blushes at the sight of blood. What were you going to say, Tom? Okay. So the clear answer on this is that there's no answer. We can't know. Okay. What we do know is that it's either A or B. Okay. He's either play acting in public while conveying, transmitting a message about what needs doing, or he is oblivious to these plans by Yoav and really is surprised and dismayed, or not necessarily Yoav, in some cases it's not Yoav. So either he is orchestrating this and masking it, or he is sincere and sentimental and he doesn't want this bloodshed which deepens the divisions in his kingdom and sows the seed for the next rebellion and the next rival to rise up. So we can't know if it's A or B, but we do know clearly that it's either A or B. One of these is true. Now, if Machiavelli, if David is Machiavelli, is this Machiavel, is this schemer and pretender, then okay, that's a clear explanation for the discrepancy between his public words and his deeds. Okay, the fact that he never fires Yoav, for example, he never kills Yoav. Okay. So if he's a Machiavel, then that's an explanation that explains, okay, he's saying this, acting, but in fact, he's behind it. Fine. If, on the other hand, if it's option B, well, okay, so not option B. It could be. So if he is truly, if the acts of sorrow and anger in public are sincere, there might be an explanation for how this is all happening in David's favor. Okay, he might not be a calculating Machiavellian performer, and this goes back to our characterization of David as this beloved character. Okay, so people who have the gift of charisma, the gift of charisma is the gift of being loved and served by other people. People are drawn to you. Okay, and again, remember how the text tells us about numerous people who loved David. Okay, but never the other way around. Never that David loved any of these characters who loved him. And so when you look at how this love manifested itself, you see, we saw what love for David made Michal and Abigail and Jonathan do for him. Okay? Michal betrayed her father. Abigail betrayed her husband, killed her husband. Jonathan not only betrayed his father, but gave up his own crown for David. Okay? So maybe what we're seeing with Yoav and the other killers, the Gibeonites, the two men who murdered Amasa. Okay, maybe we see love for David, and people doing stuff for David. Okay, so my point is, like I said, we can't determine for sure if David is a true sentimentalist and things just happen by chance. Or if David's a Machiavel, or if David is simply this character with super charisma, and people want to do things for him. The point about, again, charismatic people is that people who have such charm, such people who elicit such love and devotion in other people, things really do just get done for them. And they aren't necessarily aware of what's happening off stage. Okay, so they don't necessarily know what makes their charmed life possible. Okay, it's like in Beckett, when King, who is it? Can somebody rid me of this meddlesome priest? Who's the king? I think it's Henry II, right? Okay, it doesn't matter. Where he says, will somebody rid me of this meddlesome priest? And sure enough, somebody kills him. Okay, but he didn't necessarily want it, ask for it. It's just kind of, he expressed frustration with this annoying person, and somebody devoted to him, okay, I'll do this for you. I'll help you. Okay, so again, people with charisma, people who are loved by others, sometimes aren't aware of what people are doing for them off stage, and this allows them, in this case David, to benefit from the work that others do for them, or for what others do on their behalf, while their own hands and their own consciences remain clean. Okay, so again, David's anger and grief might actually be sincere, but the point is that we all notice, like I said, we all notice that he does not reject the fruits of Yoav's actions. Okay? After Yoav murders of Ner, for example, David says outright that Yoav is an evil minister who acted against the good king's wishes. And Yoav deserves punishment for it. You can read the details in chapter 2 Samuel chapter 3, towards the end there, like verse 25 to 40 or something. So David says Yoav is an evil minister, he deserves punishment. Yet Yoav remains David's chief of staff until David's dying day. He doesn't get punished. He doesn't get fired. Okay. David repeatedly says throughout the David story, David repeatedly complains and says that he hates the Tzruya brothers, Yoav and his brother Avishai. Okay, he calls them names, he calls them evil, he wishes divine punishment on them. Yet he never punishes them, never fires them. They're always there by his side, at his employ, doing his bidding, fighting his enemies, killing his rivals. Okay, so again, I'm backing away from this. We can't determine whether David is sincere, a Machiavel, or a sincere charismatic person who's eliciting these actions from Yoav without knowing that he's doing it. But what we do see for sure is that David hates the Tzruya brothers, or at least says he does. Probably does. So he hates the tree, but he loves the fruit. Okay? He never dismisses them. They're always there by his side. And again, for me, it reminds me of the death of Pompey. At the end, after Caesar defeats Pompey at Pharsalus, he follows Pompey to Egypt, and when he gets there, he finds out that Pompey had been assassinated by his own soldiers. Okay, who present Pompey's severed head to Caesar to signal to Caesar that, okay, we're ending the war against you, we accept you as our ruler. But do you remember what Caesar does in response when he gets Pompey's head? Or when he hears the news?
Upset. I don't remember the exact wording though.
He's heartbroken. He's outraged. Okay, they offer him the severed head, and Caesar turns away in revulsion. Okay, and when Pompey's seal ring, just like Saul's crown and amulet were presented to David, okay, Pompey's ring was presented to Caesar. Just like with David, Caesar breaks down in tears over the sad fate of Pompey. Same scene that we saw with Saul's death, when the crown is brought to David by that Amalekite boy. And then, just like with David, Caesar hunts down and kills all of Pompey's assassins, just like David kills that Amalekite boy. Okay? And so again, just like with David here, we're left to wonder whether Julius Caesar, who we all thought that we knew Caesar as a hard and ruthless man. Okay? But maybe, based on this scene here in Egypt, maybe in fact he was a gentle and noble soul who was devastated by the dishonorable death of his mortal and hated enemy. Okay, so maybe so we thought he was a hard man. Here we see him as a sentimentalist, but maybe he is a hard man, and this is just a performance, a political performance for public relation purposes. And the two situations are similar because David and Caesar both faced the same challenge. Okay? They were victors in a bloody civil war who now faced the challenge of uniting the country. Okay? Look, David fought 4 civil wars against Saul, then against Ishbosheth and Avner, then against Absalom, and then against Shiva. Okay, so 4 rebellions, four civil wars. So clearly there was this division in the people, and there was a challenge. He faced a challenge to heal the nation. Okay, so both David and Caesar had to find ways to turn half their countrymen, to convert half their countrymen from enemies into willing subjects, to win their hearts somehow. And so in this context, perhaps the political performance and the image consultancy might explain this perplexing development where, again, we see this hard soldier like Caesar brought to tears by the death of Pompey. And we see David, who's also, he's a rough guy. And he's, I guess, well, I don't know. You understand what I mean. Okay. Okay, so getting back to our story. So we now kind of have a better sense of David. Getting back to our story, why was Saul so afraid of David?
I don't think it was until after he defeated Goliath that the fear started.
Right.
It seemed to not only David's capabilities but also his popularity.
Right. It's the popularity. Okay, where the people celebrate David for his accomplishments. Okay, so but what does he have? So he, look, that's a resentment. Okay, maybe he's jealous that David is popular. Okay, that would explain resentment. But we're told that he's afraid of David, and he acts like he's afraid of David. What is he afraid of, and is it a paranoid fear or is it a justified fear?
It seems like he's afraid that David is going to take his kingdom,
Right.
because he's that talented and popular.
Right. Okay. That the people love him, and that David has, and he thinks that David has his eye on his kingdom. Okay.
And it's not paranoid at all. It's knowing his character.
Well, knowing his, well, we know the character. You're right. So we're in a better position than well, actually, maybe Saul could see his character too. I don't know.
His brother knew his character, so it makes sense that he would know it too. I mean, it's not like it's a secret that he was ambitious and he was, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
He didn't just accidentally come into the scene.
camp. Yeah. Well, look, let's see if Saul had, if Saul could tell beyond character, but with actions. Because look, we develop a sense of David's character throughout the story. We don't necessarily have the full view of the man. Well, I'm not sure. The Naval story tells us a lot. Okay, but the Naval story comes after, for a number of chapters, Saul is already chasing him. But let's see if Saul, at the time, had signs that he could see that David had his eye on his crown. Let's see if David gave it away. David gains the affection of Saul's son, the crown prince, and then take a look at, this is 1 Samuel chapter 18. This is verses 1 through 4, chapter 18. No, wait. Oh yeah, sorry. This is 19. Chapter 18. Yeah. 1 through 4. Could you read your translation, David?
So I have when David finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan's soul became bound up with the soul of David. Jonathan loved David as himself. Saul took him into his service and that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan and David made a pact because Jonathan loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the cloak and tunic he was wearing and gave them to David, together with his sword, bow, and belt.
Right. Okay. So
David went out.
Jonathan, yeah, Jonathan dresses David with his, again, this is the crown prince, you know, kind of the Saul's right-hand man in the army. Jonathan dresses David with his uniform and his sword and his bow and his gear. These are all symbols of authority, of military authority and political authority. Okay? The crown prince transfers them to this popular general. Okay? And then, if you read in chapter 18, verses 5 through 9, and further, chapter 18, 5 through 9, and further 13 to 16, and then at the end of the chapter, verses 29 to 30, you'll see that David does well on the battlefield. He gets a military promotion. This is in verse 13. And he gains the affection of the people and of Saul's generals. Okay, they all support him. They all, he's popular in Saul's army with the people beyond the army, the civilians. And by the way, when it says in verse 16, in all of Israel and Judah, you see again this division between Israel and Judah, and then well before the splitting of the two kingdoms. Okay, these are two sociological or social groups within the United Kingdom, Judah and Israel. But that's not my point. My point is, in all of Israel and Judah loved David because he, I don't know how you have it in English, he comes and goes, or goes and comes before them. Is that how you have it? Goes and comes?
For he marched at their head.
Okay, so the phrase, the translation is correct here. When it says going and coming in Hebrew, and it repeats itself numerous times in the Bible, it's a euphemism for military leadership. Okay, I think the phrase, well, I know the phrase appeared already with Moses. Okay, it might appear even beforehand, but when Moses says goodbye to the Israelites in Deuteronomy 31, he tells them, hey, I'm 120 years old and can no longer go and come. Okay. And also in Joshua, Caleb, when Caleb wants Joshua to give Caleb military command, he says that I can still come and go. I can still go and come. To clarify that despite my age, I can still lead my people in battle. This is in Joshua 14. In any case, so it's a figure of speech connoting military vitality. And I think it's connected to virility. I think because the words for going and coming in Hebrew are going out and coming in. So I think it comes from a sexual thing about going out and coming in. And I don't need to explain the connection between sexual virility and military vitality or physical vitality. In any case, military leadership is the main kingly function, and David, not Saul, is getting the lion's share of the credit for Israelites' success in the battlefield. Again, if you could take a look at, again, still chapter 17, verse 7 through 16. Here, I've got it here.
So I have the shaft of the spear was like a weaver's. This is the Goliath.
No, no,
I have, you said 17:7 or 18:7?
18:7. Here, I've got it
Okay.
here. Okay, and the cheering women. So I guess verse 6. So they go to war, and when David returned from slaying the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel to sing and with musical instruments towards King Saul with his drums. With drums, with joy, and with cymbals. And the cheering women sang out and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Hika Shaul be'alafav, v'David b'revivotav. And Saul was very chagrined, and the matter displeased him. And he said, they ascribed to David tens of thousands, and to me they ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the entire kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. Let's see. And so it was on the morrow that the evil spirit from God rested upon Saul, and he raved in the midst of the house, and he's trying to kill David with a spear. David feared him, and Saul removed him from being with him, so cast him away, and made David a captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. Again, he led the people. And David was successful in all ways, and the Lord was with him. And Saul saw that he was very successful, and he feared him. And all of Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. So, so the point is that Saul sees that David gains the love of the people, gains the admiration and celebration of the soldiers, of the women, of Saul's own generals, and he gains the love of the king's daughter. And he aims to marry the king's daughter, marry into the king's family. So Saul sees all of this, and of course he sees a potential he sees a challenge. As you can see explicitly in the verses that I read here. Okay, Saul was distressed over David's success and popularity, noticing that the people gave David, not the king, credit for the victory. Okay, what next? Soon they'll give him the throne. Because look, the crown goes to your protector. And the people see David as their protector. David is the victor over the enemy. Okay? And it says that he feared him. Okay? In chapter 20, verses 30 to 31, Saul also notices this friendship and the fact that Jonathan, the prince, is serving David. Okay? Jonathan just helped David escape Saul. And so Saul chastises Jonathan and tells him, as long as he lives, you will never be king. Okay, and we happen to know, which Saul doesn't know this, but we know that is actually David and Jonathan's plan. Okay, if you jump to chapter 23, verses 16 to 18. Okay, so again, David is on the run from Saul, and Jonathan seals an alliance with David, and they agree. Again, in chapter 23, verse 16 to 18, they agree that David shall rule as king, and Jonathan will be his second in command. Okay, so Saul tells Jonathan that as long as he's alive, you will not be king. And Jonathan is actually fine with it. In fact, Jonathan is in on the plot, David's plot, to unseat his father. Okay, so Tal said, Saul is afraid of David. Saul is afraid that David is after his throne. Okay, he sees his popularity in the army, outside the army. He sees, David has married into his family. David has turned his son against him. Okay, but he doesn't even Saul doesn't see how deep David has advanced his case. Okay, that Jonathan not only helps this rebel against his father, but in fact has agreed to abdicate his crown for David. Okay, he's in on the plan. Now, we're not when you read these verses in 23:16 to 18. Okay, that Jonathan agrees that David will be king, and I will be your second in command. Do you get any sense of what their plan is for Saul in this agreement? I agree. There's nothing there. Okay, it's unclear. Okay, it's unspoken. So it's as if Saul doesn't exist. Okay, so it's unclear. Like, how exactly is David going to be king?
It does seem like there's not going to be a direct military confrontation between them, because do not be afraid, the hand of my father Saul will never touch you.
Well, but that's because what Jonathan has been doing. The context for this meeting is that Jonathan helped David escape, and then Jonathan hatched this plan to find out what Saul's plans are, so he could tell David. So I think my father's hand will never touch you is because, don't worry, I'll help you. Okay, I'll protect you. But look, it's unclear how exactly David will become king. Yeah, because there is a king. His name is Saul. Okay, so how will that seat be vacated? It's unclear. But Saul fears that David is out to take his throne, which we know is true, and Samuel knows it's true. Okay, because we're the only ones who know. I mean, we, the readers, and David and Samuel are the only ones who know that Samuel had secretly anointed David as king a long time ago already, in chapter 16, before Saul even met David. Okay, so Saul doesn't know this, what you and I know. Okay? David knows from before, as he was introduced to us, David already knew, I'm going to become king. And that's how we can understand his moves. Okay? Saul doesn't know about this secret anointing, but he sees the people turning after David. He sees his daughter betraying him for David. He sees his son betraying him for David. The only person Saul does not suspect, actually, is Samuel. Okay, poor Saul still thinks that Samuel is on his side. Like, even the night before Saul goes to battle to be killed, he still thinks that Samuel will help him. When he goes to that sorceress to raise Samuel's ghost from the dead. Okay, so he seeks Samuel's approval and help. He had no idea that Samuel already anointed some other guy. He had no idea how much Samuel detested him, or maybe Samuel didn't detest Saul, but simply detested the monarchy. Or actually, I don't know. But certainly, that trip to the sorceress was not a good one. In any case, so look, Saul is a lot of things, but paranoid is not one of them. Okay, he sees the writing on the wall as you and I know it to be. Like we know that David has these plans to become king. And even though Saul doesn't know as much as we know, he can tell the same thing. Okay, he understands David, and he knows what David is after better than most commentators do. Okay, and many of the readers are kind of, okay, we read David not killing Saul. We read David kind of making a plan to become king, but never saying what he'll do to Saul. David's lament when Saul is killed, and so we kind of, okay, so we seem to understand David as a benign character, which Saul does not. Okay, so he. Okay, so Saul is afraid of David. It turns out correctly, as we know. And he's not going to just walk away and let David take what's his, okay, and do who knows what to Saul's children. And by the way, in chapter 24, if you take a look quickly at verses 24, verses 21 to 23. Okay, this is after the second time when David doesn't kill Saul when he can. So 21 to 23, Saul says to David across that mountain, across a distance, I know that you will eventually be king here, over this kingdom. Please vow to me that you will not kill my sons and destroy my line and wipe out my lineage. Okay, and again, if you look at the response. I mean, well, there's no. Yeah. So in 23. Okay, so Saul asked him, please, when you become king, if you become king, please don't kill my sons. Don't wipe out my line. And David doesn't say, you're crazy. I don't want your crown. Your son will rule after you. David doesn't say that. David listens, and he says, I promise. I promise that when I become king, I will not kill your sons. Which, again, by the end of this book of Samuel, all of Saul's sons will be dead. None by David's hands. Okay. The only exception, the only son, the only descendant of Saul who does survive is Mephibosheth, not to be confused with Ishbosheth, who is Jonathan's son, the crippled son, whom David takes into his household in 2 Samuel chapter 9 as a kind of, a show of peacefulness, a peacemaking with Saul's family. But Mephibosheth is never a threat to David because he cannot become king because he's handicapped. Okay, so David can make this act of magnanimity without any fear, whereas that is not true with any of the other sons or male descendants of Saul. Okay, so I want us to go back to the question that we started with. So now that we know David's character a bit better and understand what he wants and understand his understanding of the situation, David's understanding of the situation that he's in, from the secret anointment to the Goliath battle to everything beyond, I want us to go back to how we started this discussion about David, and that is, why didn't David kill Saul? And how did Saul die? Okay, why didn't David kill Saul, and how did Saul die? So first, again, back to the original question, why didn't David kill Saul? Okay, so we said at the beginning that the answer is provided by David himself. And he says, I don't want to kill God's anointed. I don't want heaven forbid that I will hurt God's anointed. I don't want to hurt him. Okay, he tells us twice. Okay, so now that we know David a bit better, know the situation a bit better, understand David's ambition, David's considerations a bit better, how would you explain what this refusal by David, his refusal to kill Saul?
It could be that he doesn't want to. The anointed explanation, he doesn't want to incur the bad will of the biblical God is one explanation, or that he's been relying on that every step of the way in some respect, I suppose.
Mm.
Another explanation might be he doesn't have a taste for doing those kinds of things.
Okay, I think we can take
Even with-
that. I think we can take that off the table.
Well, even with Uriah, he doesn't do the deed himself.
Yeah, but here too, Avishai offered to kill Saul for him, and David stops him. He says, "No, we can't do this.
Yeah, it
Shouldn't do
doesn't-
this." Look, let me flip the question. We saw that that when Saul gave the princess to David, the purpose was to have David killed. Okay, so why didn't Saul want to kill David himself, and instead hatch this plan that would have David killed in battle versus the Philistines? Why didn't Saul want to kill David?
By that time, didn't Saul know that that the biblical God was on David's side?
Wait, I'm sorry, I just didn't hear what?
Didn't David, like in the beginning, tell Saul that that God was on his side, and he was kept on performing impressive deeds? So the biblical, I guess, Saul didn't want to anger the biblical God who was backing David by doing something directly against him. Maybe
Well,
that doesn't
but,
work.
but when does David tell Saul? First of all, it's David telling him that, hey, God loves me.
It is David's. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. David's.
So first of all, I don't know if Saul would take, okay, that this is the word of God, but also I don't think this happens until David is already being chased away by Saul, right?
Let's see this one.
Remember the marriage offer with 100 foreskins, etc. That's after Goliath. That's early in the story.
And
But look, but even if you're right, look, it's just David telling him that, hey, God loves me. Okay? I don't think we can take, that Saul would say, okay, well, I guess if David says that God is on his side, I shouldn't kill him. But again,
it was in 1736. It's when he says, "Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and that uncircumcised Philistine shall end up like one of them, for he has defied the ranks of the living God. The Lord," David went on, "who saved me from lion and bear will also save me."
Oh, okay, yeah. So all he says is, hey, God helped me. God has kind of smiled on me till now, and so I'll be safe. Yeah. Okay. So, but look, so I think we can take the idea that killing David will be an act of kind of an attack on God's favorite. Saul doesn't think that. In fact, Saul has reason to think that he's God's favorite. He was anointed by God. He doesn't know that David was anointed. Okay, so Saul is reluctant, clearly, to kill David. Okay, that's why he'd rather have the Philistines do it, and he's trying to maneuver the Philistines to kill him.
Possibly because he knows he's so well loved
Exactly.
by his own son, by the people, by everyone.
Exactly.
Even his own son loves him that much that he would,
David is a national hero. Okay, it's bad PR.
it would be a political mistake to do that because
exactly.
he would be shunned immediately.
Yeah, or it's just bad PR. If you're going to kill someone, kill somebody that the people hate. Killing the people's champion.
His plan is genius because he's not the killer. The enemy kills him.
Yeah, exactly. And then he can go to the funeral and say what a great guy David was, but he got rid of him. Okay. So look, if it's bad PR for the king to kill a national hero like David, then it's definitely also true in reverse. It's bad PR for David to kill
A king.
to kill a king and to take his place. Okay, look, think back to Abigail's words about Nabal. Okay, where Abigail tells David, you shouldn't bloody your own hands with the blood of your enemies, given your ambitions to become king. Okay, don't bloody your own hands. Okay, if it's bad PR for David to kill Nabal with his own hands, then certainly it's bad PR to kill King Saul. Okay, so we now understand. So we now understand that David doesn't kill Saul not because David doesn't want his crown. Again, David never says to Saul, "You're crazy. I don't want your kingdom." I mean, he does say it, but at some point he stops saying it. Okay, but we know he wants his kingdom. Okay, he doesn't kill him because he doesn't want to bloody his own hands. It's terrible PR. Okay. So how does Saul die then? Okay, we know that David and Jonathan planned to replace Saul with David, but it was never explained how this was going to happen. Okay, so fortunately for David, Saul dies, again, not at David's hands. David's hands are clean. Okay, sounds familiar, I hope. Actually, okay. So how does Saul die? Do you think? Actually, you know what? Let me. Do you have another like 10 minutes? I know it's kind of late. Yeah? Okay. So let me share the screen with you. Share screen. Oh, could you cover your cameras? Great. Okay. So, just as an aside, why do you think Saul went to that battle at the Gilboa? I mean, he clearly believed Samuel's ghost. Okay, he knew that he was going to his death that day, and that his sons will die with him, and that Israel will be defeated. And yet he went. He led Israel, and he brought his sons with him, despite Samuel's warning, prediction that they're all going to die. Okay, why do you think Saul would do that? If he believed Samuel, which obviously he did. He was devastated by it.
Yeah, fear of he would lose face if he didn't.
Yeah.
Reputation consideration.
Yeah, but again, that's reputation versus death. Okay, so like it might be. I mean, honor is a big thing. I'm not dismissing it. Like it's just a side issue. It's a kind of a character issue with Saul. I don't want to dwell on it, but it seems. Like we talked last week about how there's this argument that Saul has this character flaw, and that he's afraid of the people, that he's not ready for prime time because of this shyness and whatever. My sense is that, and last week I mentioned that we see evidence that Saul does step into this role of king, and that God turns away from him. God rejects Saul not because of a character flaw, but because of a religious offense. Okay, that Saul committed this religious offense, and that is the religious offense in chapter 15 in context of the honeycomb story shows God that Saul isn't mindful of God's word. Okay, that it's not the character flaw which isn't there anymore, but the the religious offense. And perhaps here too you see that Saul, that shy farm boy, by now certainly sees himself as king. Okay, we saw it already in his first battle against the Ammonites, and in the battle against the Philistines when he offered the sacrifices instead of Samuel, and he went ahead and led the people and won. Okay, so here too, he's a king. He sees himself as king, and he does his job. Okay? We saw it also with the honeycomb story. Okay, my law is law, and even if my own son has to suffer the consequences, the punishment, whatever, I'm the king, and my word is law. Okay, so I see here in this story where he goes to war despite knowing the tragic end of it, and as another instance, or another argument against this idea that Saul didn't have the leadership chops for the job of king. But in any case, when Saul goes to the war in the north, so the Gilboa is here. Do you see my cursor? Do you see my cursor here circling?
Yeah, yep, I see it.
So the Gilboa is here in northern Samaria. So when Saul is here fighting his last battle, David is here in Ziklag, okay, between Beersheba and Gaza. Okay, this is the city that Achish, the king of Gath, gave David the city of Ziklag, somewhere here. Okay, on the border between the Philistines, Judah, and Amalek. So when Saul is fighting in the north, David is in the south in Ziklag. Now, before Achish goes to war against Saul in the Gilboa, he calls on David, his vassal, to join him in battle, and David agrees and goes with the Philistines. But if you read the story, you see that the Achish's Philistine allies, the other generals, refuse to fight with David in their midst. They don't trust David. He's not one of us. He's one of them. So Achish releases him back to Ziklag, back to the south, and David goes all the way back to the south. Okay, so the text, the author, clarifies to us, okay, for any suspicious minds among us, that David was not there at the Gilboa. David was not at that battle. David did not fight against his Israelite brothers. David did not fight against the Israelite king. David did not kill Saul. David's hands are clean. Okay, they're clean. So the text, because look, Saul dies within the context of this fight between Saul and David, and so we just clarify, David was not at that fight. The Philistines killed Saul. It's kind of Saul's plan in reverse, where Saul didn't want to kill David, let the Philistines kill him. So here, as it turns out, David doesn't kill Saul, the Philistines kill him. In any case, so while the Philistines go to war against Saul and the Israelites in the north, David, if you look at chapter 30, 1 Samuel chapter 30, at the end there, verses 26 to 31, David goes to war in the south against the Amalekites. And he wins a great war, and he sends the plunder that he takes to the elders of Judah. Again, David's tribe. Okay, again, chapter 30 at the end there. So David is signaling to the elders of Judah that he's not with the enemy. Yes, I'm a vassal of the Philistine king, but I'm fighting for Judah. Okay, again, look at the map. The Amalekites are the enemies of the Judeans. Okay, so I'm I'm a servant and a protector for the people of Judah against their enemies, the Amalekites. And this plunder that I took from the Amalekites is not mine. It's not the Philistines. It's ours. It's Judah's. I'm sending it to the elders of Judah. Okay. And so the question is, why does he send this message and this plunder to the elders of Judah and not of the rest of Israel? Why doesn't he send these goodies to other tribes as well?
Is it because he's uncertain of his status with the other tribes at this time?
Right. So look, first of all, just geographically, Amalek is only the enemy. Touches only Judah. Okay, so the Amalek is the enemy of Judah. They're too far away, and they're not contiguous with other tribes. Okay. But also, and more important, David knows that for him to take over Saul's united kingdom of all of Israel, he will have to go to war against Saul's base, against the northern tribes. He will have to have his own base. And of course his own base is going to be his tribe, Judah. Okay, so David has to know, David's not a dummy, he knows that the war that's coming between the house of David and the house of Saul will be a war between David's camp, which is Judah, and Saul's camp, which is Israel, the northern tribes. As soon as Saul is dead, that is. Okay. Now, flip please to 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Chapter 2. Yeah, okay. So, David and his men leave Ziklag and return to Judea after Saul's death. And they settled there, and the people of Judah christened David as king of Judah. Okay, so he is the leader, he's the king of his tribe, not yet. So Saul is dead, but David becomes king of Judah, not of all of Israel. Okay, and Ishbosheth is the king, is the sitting king of the remaining tribes, of Benjamin and the northern tribes. Okay. Now in that section, in chapter 2 here, 2 Samuel chapter 2, 1 through 7, the first thing after he becomes king of Judah, David turns to the people of Yavesh Gilad. This is a region in Transjordan here, so it's a region in Transjordan that had a deep and historical alliance with the tribe of Benjamin, Saul's tribe. Okay, you can, if you want to read about the origins, you'll find it of this relationship. You'll find it in Judges chapters 19 to 21, and in 1 Samuel chapter 11. So David commends them for their act of loyalty to Saul. So basically, after the battle, the Philistines abused the body of Saul and Jonathan, and the people of Yavesh Gilad come and they remove them and they bury them, give them a decent burial. And so David commends the people of Yavesh Gilad for their loyalty to Saul, and he expresses sorrow for the death of your beloved king. And oh, by the way, I've been made king of Judea. Okay, this is in 1 through 7. Okay, 7. And here, so what you did for Saul, and by the way, I've been made king of Judea. Okay? And so what's the response? Again, just the
I
kind
have,
of
but
the text, the pshat in verses 8 through 10. What do you get from the response?
But Abner, son of Ner, Saul's army commander, had taken Ishbosheth, son of Saul, and brought him across the Menahaim, and made him king over Gilead.
Right.
The
Right.
Azurites, the
Uh,
Jezreel.
Actually, okay, we talked about this last week about your translation. It doesn't make him king over Gilad. So the response is that Avner, Saul's army chief, this is, so David has Yoav, Saul, and now Ishbosheth have Avner. So Avner, the response when David says to the people of Yavesh Gilad, oh, by the way, I've been made king of Israel, of Judea. Avner's response was to christen Saul's son, Ishbosheth, as king of Israel, king of the rest of the Israelites, of the northern tribes. Okay, so, so just about the translation, what it says in the Hebrew is that Avner christens Ishbosheth as king to Gilead and to the Assyrians and to Israel. And over the tribes of Ephraim and Benjamin and all of Israel. Okay, so he christens him king over these Israelite tribes and to these foreign powers. Okay, so Avner is making Ishbosheth, declaring Ishbosheth as king over Ephraim and Benjamin and Israel, and he sends diplomatic missions to the neighboring peoples, the Assyrians, Gilad, Israel, again, declaring like a diplomatic mission, declaring introducing the new king to them. Okay, but what you see here is that David is coming to the people of Yavesh Gilad and offering them to accept him. These are again the allies of Benjamin, the allies of Saul, the ones who again rescued Saul's body. He's presenting himself to them and offering them to accept him as Saul's successor, as the king of the United Kingdom. And the response in the very next verse is the northern tribes say, no thanks. We have a king. It's Saul's son. Saul's son, Ishbosheth, is the legitimate king of the United Kingdom, not you. Okay, so it's David offers himself as a successor, and the people of Israel say, reject him. And then what comes next is that anticipated war between the houses of Saul and David, okay? Between Israel and Judah, north and south. And the war lasts from chapter 2 through chapter 3. Okay? So let us go back and then finish this by going back to the question of then. So we asked, why didn't David kill Saul, and how did Saul die? Okay, so I think we understand better all the context for everything. And so let's look back now again at Saul's death, which happens in chapter 31. The chapter that immediately follows David's war against Amalek and him sending his plunder to the people of Judah. Okay, immediately after that, the war in the north, in the Gilboa, commences, and then we have those two conflicting accounts of Saul's death. Okay, the first account where he falls on his sword in chapter 31, and then a very different account that David gets from that Amalekite boy in the first chapter of 2 Samuel. Okay, so so we already established the differences. In the second account, the Amalekite boy's account, Saul dies alone, not with his squire. So he's trying to kill himself. Okay, And this mysterious Amalekite boy happens to be there at the battle. Again, look at the geography. Okay, look at my cursor. This Amalekite boy happens to be, he says, I'm quoting here, I happen to be at the Gilboa. How does an Amalekite happen to be at the Gilboa? Okay, in any case. So Saul is trying to kill him. Saul is alone. He's trying to kill himself, and this mysterious Amalekite boy happens to be there at the battle. And that's how Saul finds his death. Okay, so what the Amalekite boy is doing there, God knows. Okay, but where's David at this time? Okay, when that Amalekite boy is wandering through the mountains of Gilboa, where's David?
David's down south in the battle, or in Philistia.
Right. In Ziklag, in the city that he governs here. Okay, this is after he defeats the Amalekites. Okay, so David is here near Amalek when this Amalekite boy is wandering for some reason up there. Okay, so already pretty interesting. And so what we have is the biblical author giving us one account of Saul's death, and the Amalekite boy giving us a different account of Saul's death. Okay. Now, obviously, the biblical author gave us two accounts for a reason. Okay. The author knows that these accounts are different. He wants us to have the discussion that we're having now. We're having it because the author wants us to have it. Okay. The author is hitting us with these. It's a very important event. Saul is killed. Saul's death is a very important event in this book and in Israelite history. Okay, and the author gave us two obviously conflicting accounts back to back. Okay, the last chapter of 1 Samuel, the first chapter of 2 Samuel are two different accounts of the same event. Okay, so the author clearly wants us to have to scratch our heads and say, what's give here? What gives here? Okay, how can Saul die this way here, but die this way there? So the author wants us to ask, which account is true? So which account do you think is true?
Seems like the young boy from Amalek's account seems a little bit of a stretch.
Why?
First of all, he has to go all the way up north and then come all the way back down south to talk to David. Why would he be doing all that? Why would he go all the way up there? I guess he would have to be like, how would he happen to find himself in a situation where he could take care of Saul?
That's a big question. The answer that he says is, well, I happen to be there. That's quite a happening. Okay, but take a look, please, at 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 10. I stood above him and killed him because I knew that he won't live after. And I took the crown on his head and his armlet. And here I am presenting them to my Lord, to David. Look, if we have evidence, that the Amalekite boy was up there in the north. There's physical evidence that he was there with the king at his death. This Amalekite boy was in the Gilboa. That is clear. He brings Saul's crown. It's like, the two men who murdered Ishbosheth and brought his head to David. We have foolproof evidence that they were there when Ishbosheth was killed. They have his head. Same thing here. We know that this boy was on the battlefield right next to Saul when he died, because he has the recognizable armlet and the crown of the king of Israel. Okay? It's not something you can buy at a pawn shop. Okay? So look, the second account has this credibility, which is a big thing because it casts doubt on the first account. Okay? If the first account is true, if the biblical author's account of Saul's death is true, then how did the Amalekite boy get this crown and armlet that he's now giving to David in full view of David's people? Everyone can see. There are witnesses. This is David's crown. This is Saul's crown. Okay? So look, it could be that the first account is true. Okay? And then the arms bearer left the crown and the armlet and simply fled. And the Philistines also didn't bother to take the crown and armlet. They just took Saul's body and hung it, and abused it. But they left the crown on the ground. And then this Amalekite boy just wandered over and, hey, look, there's a crown. Okay, so it could be a lie, but the idea that the arms bearer, that the squire, wouldn't take the crown and save it, and then that the Philistines, who were right there, who took the body, also wouldn't take the crown, that's quite a lot. And again, the author is asking us to do what we're doing now. Which account is more credible? And it seems to me, that he's giving us physical evidence for one account, for the second account, for the Amalekite boy's account, that cannot be explained in any other way. Okay, the second account invalidates the first account, and the second account has physical evidence, incontrovertible physical evidence. Okay, so I guess it's still a question, but it seems to me that the weight of evidence, as people read it, and also it's the second account. Okay, so here comes the first account, and then comes a second account that invalidates the first account, and therefore that's the only one that remains standing in the mind of the reader. Okay. So why is it important that the Amalekite boy killed Saul and not Saul's servant, Saul's squire?
I'm stuck on why would the biblical narrator tell us something that wasn't true?
I'm with you. But he's telling us two things. In the second account, there's this evidence that cannot be ignored. Okay, for this evidence to be, the only explanation for this evidence is to assume that the squire and the Philistines had no use for the crown and the armlet. Look, when you think of this, of this Amalekite boy, the obvious question is, who is this Amalekite? What is a young Amalekite doing in the Gilboa in the middle of a major war? All the way up north there. And an even bigger question, why does he not deliver the news of the king's death and the crown and the armlet to the king's army, to Ovnil, to the king's son Ishbosheth, or to some other Israelite authority? Instead, he travels all the way from Mount Gilboa to Ziklag. Okay? He wants, the Amalekite boy wants to give David the bad news, or I guess the good news. Okay? He wants to give David the crown and armlet of Saul. Okay? And then comes the question, why does David kill the messenger? Why does he kill the messenger?
The messenger ostensibly just killed the king of Israel, the anointed king of Israel.
Right, it's kind of like, how dare you lift a sword to the anointed king? Okay, so David goes into this public display of grief about Saul and displays his pain by killing the killer. Okay, and again, we're told that it worked. The people are assured, and the people at the time are assured that David had no hand in the death of the king. And the biblical commentators over the past 3,000 years have been assured that David had no hand in the killing of the king. You know, that David's hands are, of course, clean. And who's to say otherwise? The only one who could say otherwise is the Amalekite boy that David just killed. So look, it's very
murky.
It's a very mysterious. Look, it's a very mysterious story. But look, we now know David too well, or we know David well enough to understand his ambition, his plan, understand better why he didn't kill Saul when he could, and we can place Saul within a pattern that we'll see next week, much more clearly than I outlined today, of all of David's political rivals dropping dead like flies. And again, it goes back to that question, is David orchestrating this? Is David sending a message, but not, is David orchestrating this and acting? Shocked and surprised and heartbroken? Is David not orchestrating it, but merely displaying his anguish, and other people volunteer to do his dirty work for him, and therefore his sorrow and grief are sincere? Or is maybe it's God's hand? You know, maybe God motivated this Amalekite boy to travel north on a sightseeing tour in the middle of a war. Any case, so look, when you get to know David's character, the different choices that he makes seem less haphazard. Okay? Fighting Goliath is not some, hey, maybe I'll just fight Goliath. You understand that it's part of David's ambition to marry into the king's family, and his career, and his friendship with Jonathan, etc., etc. David has a plan. And this understanding of the character of David leads to this huge question that the author leaves for us in the middle of the road, about how did Saul die? Yeah, but look, we can ask the same question, you know, next week about how Ishbosheth died, and how Saul's 7 sons died, and how Avner died, and how Amasa died. Question mark. Okay, and we'll talk about next week, and so next week we'll talk about David and Uriah the Hittite, the Uriah affair, and Absalom and the Absalom affair. And then after that, the week after that, we'll talk about Yoav, which brings this question to the fore about who is Yoav? Is Yoav, like you said, a hatchet man, or is Yoav an independent actor who is serving the king as he sees fit? All right, long session. Apologies.
No, thank you.
Any questions? Any issues or questions or problems that came up?
No, I just kind of want to rethink a few things.
Yeah, look, when you read the story, this is this huge matzo ball that is just like it's hard to even say it. It's hard to even think it. That again, look, I can't even say it. But there is something untoward here. But the author clearly wants us to notice the discrepancy between the two accounts. And our natural tendency is to believe the author, not some Amalekite boy. But the author doesn't have the crown. The author doesn't have the armlet. And this pattern with Saul's death and the messengers or the killers showing up at David's door. Here, look. It's like your dog bringing a dead bird to you. Like, I don't know. All right. We'll pick this up next time.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.